Welcome to the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, California Virtual Book Fair, and our special program, California Calls You, a guided tour of the important books and unique ephemera highlighting the Golden State. My name is Jen Johnson, and I'm a bookseller, a member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, and a part of the California Virtual Book Fair Planning Committee. For those of you who are not aware, the ABAA was founded in 1949 to promote interest in rare and antiquarian books and book collecting, and to foster collegial relations. We strive to maintain the highest standards in the trade. All members agree to abide by the ABAA's Code of Ethics. Following this program, we hope you will consider visiting the California Virtual Book Fair at abaa.org/VBF. It is open continuously until 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time tonight. A few housekeeping issues. We are recording this session, and it will be available at a later date on the ABA's YouTube channel. This session is also streaming live on Facebook. If you have any questions, we encourage you to move your computer cursor to the bottom of the screen and write your questions in the Q&A section. The ABA's Eloisa Amezcua will help us with those questions at the end of the session, as will I. If you'd like to share a comment with all in attendance, you can also use the chat function. I would now like to introduce the folks who are going to be leading us or scrolling us through this virtual tour of the book fair. First is Gary Kurutz. He's a retired director of the California State Library's Special Collections. Previously, Kurutz was head librarian at the Sutro Library, library director of the California Historical Society, and bibliographer of Western Americana at the Huntington Library. And believe me, that's just a very short introduction of all the things that Gary has accomplished.
You're so generous. Thank you.
Theresa Salazar is the curator of the Bancroft collection of Western Americana at the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Theresa. And of course, Brad Johnson and myself, Jen Johnson, we're the owners of Johnson Rare Books and Archives. Brad is the president of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, and I happen to be the chair of our Southern California chapter. So welcome all. Thank you for joining us. We're going to dive right into this virtual tour because there was so much great material in this book fair that we had a really hard time narrowing it down. But we're going to start with an image that Gary chose because we all should have been in Oakland this year. So Gary, would you like to talk to us about this Muybridge image?
Yes, certainly. But I first would like to compliment the dealers for their scholarship and writing such wonderful descriptions of the materials they have virtually on display here. But this is one of the great iconic images of California and San Francisco created by Edward Muybridge, the great pioneer photographer in California, and some consider him to be the founder or the inventor of the motion picture with the scenes of animals and human beings in motion, but he had wanted to create a great panorama of the city where he was residing in, where his business was. So he went to the very top of Nob Hill in San Francisco and got on top of the Mark Hopkins mansion there, the newly constructed tower. But when you consider Muybridge and what he had to work with and the technology at the time, he had to bring a camera and a portable darkroom because he was using glass plate negatives. And each negative had to be coated with chemicals before he exposed it in his camera. So in order to do this 11 panel panorama, he had to have 11 glass plate negatives to make the prints from. And he had to be careful, of course, not to break anything too, but he set this up right before noon. And this is, again, a tremendous view of the city from the Mark Hopkins mansion. And one of the interesting parts of this view up on top of Nob Hill, or as they would say too, Nabob Hill for the wealthy people who live there, was that he captured the little spike fence. And I don't know if we can focus back on that, which Hopkins wanted to have the property that was still incurred on his real estate, and the man that owned it refused to sell. So what Hopkins did is he had an 11-foot high fence put around 3 sides of the home, so virtually no daylight was getting in. But the guy held forth, and he wasn't able, Hopkins wasn't able to achieve his goal. But it's amazing too, in 1877, when this was made, to see the growth of the city. It is really spread out. When you consider just in 1848, 49, that was what, 30 years ago, how much the city had developed. These beautiful hills, and you can see out into the bay with Alcatraz and Angel Island, and just sweeping through and seeing the huge business district too that was developing in now the financial district of San Francisco. But he also provided a key to identify as many of the buildings as he possibly could. And this particular set that we have available for sale actually does include the key, and frequently the key does get separated from the original and does get lost. So I consider it to be one of the great monuments of California pioneer photography, when he had, again, 11 glass plate negatives, and he had to set them up, one at a time, and then slowly move his wet plate camera, which is not an easy thing in this day and age when people have their digital phones and everything that they could take these views from. But this is just such a terrific, beautiful monument to not only San Francisco, but to the technology of photography, as California was, in many ways a leader in developing photography in the 19th century. And Muybridge certainly, we'll talk about him later too, with his studies of the human being and horse in motion, and developing what some would say was the beginning of the motion picture industry. So they credit him with that.
What a tremendous work. That's incredible.
Yes, it is. So it's wonderful that it's available here for sale. You too can own a copy of the original. Might be able to talk terms with the dealer. I can't afford it right now. So.
Exactly.
Maybe have a payment plan. Okay.
Well, we have a lot to look at. So we're going to move on to the next item, which is something that Theresa identified. And again, another great photographer, Ansel Adams. Theresa?
So this is, again, one of my favorite books, and it has actually 3 incredible contributors. You have Ansel Adams, the Grabhorn Press, and Mary Austin. So all giants in sort of California's artistic and creative world. This is a work that I'm going to try and give a little bit of the background, which I think is really interesting. So Adams is at a transition point when he's, before he embarks on this project. He's trying to decide whether he's going to be a concert pianist or a photographer. And many people say that this work moved him towards becoming a professional photographer. So I think a lot of us in the Bay Area know Albert Bender, who was a patron of the arts. So he is this a person who actually not only bought a lot of art, but actually mentored a lot of people, and Adams was one of them. So he drives with Bender to New Mexico. Adams meets Mary Austin, and Bender helps him work on this collaboration, or starts the beginning of the collaboration. So it's a long involved thing where Adams is going to move from so he's very young at this point, and definitely Mary Austin is the person who's leading this all, and it's her connections that actually allow us to for this project to finally be realized. So she knows Mabel Dodge Lujan, who runs a sort of artist salon in New Mexico with all the Taos and Santa Fe artists. And it is through her husband, Antonio Lujan, who is a Taos Pueblo Indian, that they are able to actually get the permission to go on to Taos Pueblo to actually take the images. And so I think this is a really important project because it's an amazing enterprise that Adams takes on. So there are actually there's a total of, I think it's 12 images in this. I'm actually, I think that's correct. But but it's an edition of about 108 are printed of the book. He has to print actually 108 of each of these images, and 108 plus, because he's actually quite a perfectionist. He wants to make sure that each image is really the best that it can be. His sense of the quality is really important. And I also think these images are important. Actually, I should show you the images actually being shown. Let's see, if we can back up to the first image. This gentleman is actually Tony Lujan, who is Mabel Dodge Lujan's husband. And you can see a little bit of the remnants of what is that pictorial style that Adams have started off his photography in. But as you go through some of the other images, they show a movement towards more what we would call more of that straight modern photography. And one of the things that happened while Adams was there, he was able to actually meet Paul Strand. And I think meeting Paul Strand and the other modernists in New Mexico, because a lot of the Stieglitz group was there, a lot of people like John Marion, Marsden Hartley. So he was able to interact with these people, and they also influenced him. So you can see it's a real tour de force when he takes these incredible images of the Pueblo, and then he prints them, and they're printed with Mary Austin's text. And like I said, he is looking at her texts. They're not directly related to her text, but she is the person who actually has the bigger reputation at this point, even though we now think of it as Adams' book. And I do want to sort of make to note that this is a beautifully designed book by the Grabhorn Press. So you'll notice in it all of the beautiful, it's handset, that beautiful, elegant layout, the tasteful colors, the beautiful binding. And I love the way that they play the orange against the black. And that Indian motif on the title page is actually carried throughout the design. So it's a beautiful book in all senses. And I really think it's just an important book for Adams. Adams goes on after this to actually make an incredible career, obviously probably the best known American photographer. And I know that Gary has some things he would like to add, so I'm going to let him jump in a little bit at this point.
Oh yes, just Ansel Adams again was such a monumental photographer, and just the design too that were incorporated, some of the little vignettes and things, and the colophon, what have you. And for some odd reason, it's just escaping my memory. All of a sudden, he had a wonderful graphic designer associated with the book too, the work for the Grabhorn Press. I'm sorry, I'm having a memory loss there. But
is it Valenti? I'm trying to remember.
Valenti Angelo, yes.
Yeah.
Valenti Angelo, and he was, a highly acclaimed illustrator, book designer, and he worked for the Grabhorn Press. And I'll never forget my very first meeting of the Book Club of California that I attended. A man by the name of Richard Dillon came up to me and said, "I'd like you to meet a man. His name is Valenti Angelo, and you will hear a lot about him." And that was such a great privilege. And he's gone to the big bookstore in the sky, unfortunately. Such a talented man.
Certainly 108 images were a lot for Adams to be printing, but that's a small limitation for such a wonderful book. So I imagine it's not easy. These don't probably come up very often for sale.
And it's interesting because Mary Austin actually wanted them to do a bigger publication. She wanted it to have a mass audience, even though she did like the aesthetics of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was, the New York Graphic Society reissued it in the late 70s, I think 1977. Mm-hmm. I mean, can't compare to the work of the Grabhorns, but a much more available edition.
No, you just had a perfect synchronization of all these brilliant people, led by Ansel Adams, but then Warren brothers and Blenny Angelo, and it just, and the binding is so terrific too. That just
Gorgeous.
what a great convergence of brilliant talent that these people have.
Well, although we could probably spend the rest of the day talking about it, I think we're going to move on to the Grand Canon. And Gary, you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Sure, yeah. This is one of the, again, the astonishing books produced about the American West, the tertiary history of the Grand Canyon. And this is has these beautiful panoramic images done by William Holmes, who was one of the great artists and illustrators. And this one, yeah, is inscribed from Dutton, which is very, very rare, to Jack Hillers, who was the photographer too in the expedition. And he was one of the earliest to work in the Grand Canyon area. And Wallace Stegner said to open up any of the great panoramas there is to step to the edge of 40 miles of scenery. And it is such a beautiful, beautiful book. And I've had the privilege of using it over the time for exhibitions, the great panorama that they have. There we go. And it just really captures. It's so hard, you know, I've been to the Grand Canyon a few times and you just feel so inadequate with your own cameras and what have you. And this, I think, does the best job of anything, any illustration I've ever seen to depict the grandeur of the Grand Canyon. And down at the bottom left, you can just see these tiny little figures there. So it gives you a little sense of the scale of it all. But it just was, and yeah, as Wallace Stegner said, to open to any of its double page panoramas is to step to the edge of 40 miles of outdoors. And I think that just beautifully, and these captures it. And these were done by a very sophisticated process called chromolithography, where they are learning to actually print in color. And with the chromolithograph, you had to have a separate lithographic stone for each color. So you can imagine justifying that also. Some of these illustrations or panoramas like this might have required 24 lithographic stones, each printed with a different color. So this is, you know, just a supreme achievement, not only in printing history, but also delineating and depicting and portraying the great Grand Canyon. You know, if anything makes the Grand Canyon stand out, it's this particular publication. So it's just
Gorgeous.
It's so awesome every time I hold a copy.
So, so I think we're going to move on because there's so much to see. Next, we're going to be looking at some photo albums that Theresa was spending the last couple of days deep diving into. So you want to tell us a little bit about those?
Okay, so this is an interesting group of, so there's a few albums, a couple of albums, and then some loose prints. But when we get these in the library, we're always really excited about photographic albums because they are so important in terms of their personal. Often they can be professional, and they also are these incredible, often recordings of travel. You know, I think that's one of the things that's really nice about this. This is an incredible image, I think, out of the San Javier del Bac. So they have some, what I love about this is Jesse Jack Holmes, who's he's the compiler and probably the photographer in a number of these images, even though there are some other images by some photographers. He is the brother of a better known David Hull Holmes, architect who went to Tucson in the late 1890s. And he actually went to the fledgling U of A and worked, he designed 4 of the buildings on the U of A campus, the University of Arizona campus, and also oversaw growth on the campus. But what's interesting is he later leaves, and I think 1905, he leaves his work at the campus, he resigns, and then his brother, Jack, joins him in his practice, and they design a number of images. But actually scrolling through these images is quite incredible. So the first one is a one where, you know, it's a travel narrative through the Southwest and then down into Mexico, but they have images of California, of Flagstaff. Some of them are hand colored, as you can see. They're quite lovely. And you'll see in this, because of who these two gentlemen are, just an attention to architecture. You know, you see these wonderful documents of architecture throughout the region, even though there are some canned kind of you know, touristy images, like a man you know, pulling two laden burros, you know. But again, you'll see things that when you get to Santa Fe, these beautiful architectural studies. So I think what's significant about this is it also, you know, when you get especially into the parts that talk about, here's actually the University of Arizona. When the images are of the Tucson and Arizona area, you really get documents that are of the architecture there. There's some incredible images of San Javier del Bac. So both from the roof and then also from the interior. And oftentimes you also are getting at the same time images that the Holmes brothers either designed, a lot of the houses. And, you know, there's a great site by the Tucson Historical Preservation on David Holmes, and you can actually match. Here's again San Javier del Bac. You can see the matching of you can see the watercolor drawings that Holmes did with the actual photographs that are in the album. So it's a wonderful way of studying Holmes as an architect. And also what I like is that you can see just the influence and the similar sensibility in terms of the architecture. This family originally came from St. Louis, and yet you can see both David and Jack Holmes. Here's the images from the top of San Javier del Bac. And then if you keep on scrolling through, you'll end up in the interior. But the influence is just really resonates throughout these entire albums. There's also this really nice cluster of, and they're mainly family related images of his family. So, and those are cyanotypes, and they're all just really wonderful images. So this is again, I think this cluster is so incredibly rich, and it shows this documentation. And what I like about it is not everything is annotated, but there is a lot of annotation. That's one of the things we, you know, oftentimes photographic albums, especially if they include people, if you're not annotating them, they're essentially useless to us. It's historically, you know, it's very hard to give them context. But this actually, you can see right here that we have when he's down in Mexico City, the nice identifications of where you are. So I think there's enough here. And then when you get to Arizona, they're not as well identified, but you can certainly find the context. Many of those buildings still exist. So it's a wonderful way of studying sort of the architecture of Tucson and Arizona through time.
Terrific. Thank you, Theresa. It's an amazing album. And I'm so happy the booksellers shared so many images with us on that particular listing, which is, you know, you can still go through. I'm going to turn to Brad now, and we're going to like kind of change pace because we've been talking a lot about photography. But Brad, you want to tell us a little bit about the namesake here for our fair?
Sure, yes. As you can see, we borrowed the title of this little booster piece and used it for our California Virtual Book Fair this time around. I'm sort of stepping on Gary's toes. He and his wife, Katie, wrote one of the absolutely indispensable books on the subject of California booster literature. California Calls You, The Art of Promoting the Golden State, 1870 to 1940. Anybody who's interested in this era of printing California history absolutely must get a copy. But yes, this pamphlet issued by Union Pacific, one of those iconic pieces. I mean, you see, the advertising, the marketing of California, and it starts in, the late 19th century, and California is promoted as this, a health resort, this place of bountiful harvest, natural splendor, and of course, perpetual sunshine.
All true.
Yes. And it really hits its stride in the early 20th century. After the turn of the century, and it comes in a variety of forms. Ephemeric pieces like this, books and book design, advertising like orange crate labels. And before I say anything, I'm just going to pass the baton over to Gary, who could probably.
Well, yeah, idea. I think one of the great mottos of this time period too is California for health, wealth, and sunshine. And those were the three pillars to attract people from essentially the Midwest and Eastern United States. And if you come here, you can escape the winters. You have a wonderful climate, and places like Long Beach developed as a health resort, and people that had various diseases like consumption or known as tuberculosis would come to California for cures. And also just the whole idea of the wonderful artists too that came to California too. One of my favorite was Maynard Dixon, but they did these beautiful, gorgeous brochures. And again, this was the Chamber of Commerce in action. But look at that, wonderful Union Pacific cover there with this Mission Santa Barbara in the background, and just how can you resist that, particularly if you are in Cleveland, say in January, and you can barely open up your front door because of the snow, and here you could be in Santa Barbara. So it's just enjoying things. So that really did so much to promote California. And you had a decade called the boom of the 80s, where again, land was very cheap, and again, thousands and thousands of people migrated out. And one great advantage too is that you did have railroads too. So you didn't have to go around Cape Horn or through the Isthmus of Panama. You could just come right overland via a train. And you can just see, I've always loved the island of Coronado too, on the upper right hand there. You can see where they had a tent city, and in the background is the great Hotel del Coronado. Fabulous place to stay. If you're into surfing or something, that's a good place to go to. So it's still there and kept up very well. But again, they're promoting the business culture of San Francisco. And you can see what a great transportation hub that was too, with all the lines coming in as illustrated in this brochure. So these promotional writers like Charles Nordoff, and the guy that I wrote about too, by the name of Ben Truman, did so much to gain the attention of the Eastern United States and the wonders and glories and potential of California.
Great.
Well,
I'm going to move us along a little bit quicker because we are eating away at the clock, even though I'm sure everybody would be fine if we sat here all afternoon. So Theresa, let's talk a little bit about this Japanese American Business and Residence Directory.
Yeah, and we were talking before we started, about how a lot more of these types of publications are surfacing. And what I think what's great about these publications that relate to other communities in California is it really does point at the diversity of the people who were here, quite frankly, all along. These communities date back, certainly the Japanese American community, into the 19th century, and I think this is a particularly interesting piece in that it's published a little bit after World War II. So it's published by the Nichibei Times, and it's a directory of not only San Francisco and California business, but it does include businesses elsewhere. But the publisher is the publisher of the oldest newspaper, Japanese American newspaper in California, and it was a paper that was around all the way to actually around 2006. It just recently actually closed. So it actually had always a community that was actually interested in reading what was going on. And what's good about this, what I like about this publication is it's actually 612 pages. So to me, that represents that it's a pretty vital community that's returned after World War II and the Japanese American internment. and is actually thriving. It includes advertisements like the one we're seeing, but mainly it is just a listing of businesses. And I think one of the other openings is of those listings, and you can see how dense it is. So what I like about it is that it shows this. It's printed in both, obviously you're seeing English and Japanese. So that audience, can I think a lot of the younger generation probably didn't actually read Japanese, and at this point, it would be very useful for them to have that text in English. But I think it's also good in that it shows not only this community, but also this community and its place in San Francisco and in the other communities where the Japanese Americans were. And so it's a great record of how these ethnic communities, again, throughout the West, fit into the urban and rural life of the area. So I think it's a great item, and I'm glad that more of them are surfacing them, because I think we don't have enough often in our collections that reflect these communities.
Great, thank you, Theresa. Let's move on to Fruits of Mormonism, which is something that Gary identified. Gary, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, this is first of all, extremely rare book of California and an overland journey to California. The Fruits of Mormonism was written by Nelson Slater. And what is fascinating about this is that in the overland trek going from the East or Midwest to California, you often at the time had to go through Great Salt Lake City. And there you were encountering a newly founded culture of the Mormon religion that Brigham Young had established, when he said, this is the spot, when he established Salt Lake City. But they also found it very difficult trying to interact with people of the Mormon faith. I'm not trying to degrade their religion, but these people coming from the Midwest had some rather negative opinions about that. And so this Nelson Slater wrote this up. But also what is important too, if you're really into trivia and you say, what was the first book ever printed in Coloma, downtown Coloma? And that was this one here, The Fruits of Mormonism. And Coloma, of course, was the site where Marshall had discovered gold. He had that famous recollection. He says, I'll never forget that morning when I was taking my usual walk along the race of the mill, and I saw something sparkling in the ditch. And I reached my hand down, picked it up, and I was certain that it was gold. And that's January 24th, 1848. But this Slater's Fruits of Mormonism was a terrific imprint for Coloma. They say it was the earliest one, and actually I haven't done enough research. I don't know if there's ever been any other thing printed in Coloma.
Probably not likely.
That's a really, really, scarce and important.
It is very, very scarce.
Yeah, and the history of California's early history is really tied closely to that of Mormonism. Here in Southern California, of course, the Mormon Church established a foothold near us here in San Bernardino. And
that's right. Yeah.
In 1853, they laid out the city to be a miniature version of Salt Lake City, and identical street names. And during the 1850s, leading up to the Civil War, San Bernardino was as large and prominent as Los Angeles.
That was very, very important in the with the Mormons. They were evading the persecution that they suffered in the eastern United States and in Illinois. So they came out to Salt Lake City and then spread further westward. Also, just one other piece of trivia about this. This is the first book that California submitted for copyright too. So it has that distinctive first copyrighted book published in California. So that beautiful Coloma. So it has that value as well. So, but it is terrific for the overland description and interacting with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it just was very, very important and a very rare book. So
great. So we're gonna move up in our history a little bit. So Theresa, let's talk a little bit.
Yes, we are. So another thing that people are beginning to collect very actively is, certainly the activism that's happening from the late 60s all the way, actually all the way to the present with Black Lives Matter. I think this kind of magazine is reflective of that. Mi Vida Loca is this wonderful publication, and what it is it's sometimes in your face, but that's quite all right, because I think that's part of what this culture is intended to show. It's the vitality of Mexican American culture, and so it's meant to say we are here, and you need to notice us. We are a community that has great vitality, but they do address issues like the gang culture. They address things like the deaths that results from that, and the need of the community to come together. I think that it's the graphics are really wonderful in this publication. It's I think a community-based publication, and I think that's actually really important as well. And I think that given that, I think it has incredible resonance today, because you see again the same thing, that people get marginalized for who they are. And I think that that continues to happen with, also Native American, Asian American, African American communities. And I mean, what I love about this, even this, this woman activist from Guatemala, the fact that it shows that, there's an activism, there's a community base, there's a connectivity that's very vital, but there's also a statement in here that we too are Americans, and that this is part of it. And part of the richness of this country is the different ways that communities bring their cultures to the table. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Theresa. So I know that we're getting short on time, so I'm going to ask you, I think we can move on to Gary, if you want to do the Kellogg Comstock, or if there's something else on your list you'd rather move to.
Oh, this is one of my favorite images.
Okay, good.
He's got his right. And just a very new William Reese catalog. Look, he's on here. It's around. And, when I worked at the State Library, I had the privilege of doing a Gold Rush exhibit in 1998 for the 150th anniversary. And who did I choose to be my cover boy? But this guy here. And this is done by the Courier Company and Kellogg and Comstock. And it shows the well-dressed, well-outfitted 49er on his way to California. Can you look at how well he's dressed? Beautiful boots and a jacket, and he's just totally equipped. Of course, the rush to California was inspiring a little bit of satire at the time too. And so you can see this guy, loaded down with, his wash pan and his, tea kettle and, some sausage from one end of the stick and the other end, some fish. Wonder how that smelled by the time he was out there. So and he has a little bag here. So this was, I think, a great way to portray the mania of going to California. And is laden with gold mining materials, and is St. Louis their sign said St. Louis 350 miles, to California 1,700 miles. So he was going to walk it, and that's a little bit of a trek. But I hope those boots lasted too in his trek. So this is, I think, one of the iconic images gets reproduced over and over again, even though it's well known and common. It's still in its original form, it's very uncommon, and I just love this. It really, in my mind, encapsulates the rush for riches mania that was, circulating around the world at the time. Too. This would give anybody maybe second thought about making the walking trip from, say, Cincinnati to San Francisco or Yerba Buena, so or even to Coloma if you can get there. So
great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, I'm going to let you talk about this next one in your list, and then Theresa, think about what you want your last one to be. Okay.
So here in Los Angeles, an industry town, and we just got finished with the Golden Globes, and we're leading up to the Oscars, which means you can't open up a newspaper or turn on the radio without seeing awards eligible or for your consideration. So for those of you who may have seen the David Fincher's film Mank, there is a subplot in the film about Upton Sinclair's run for the California governorship. This piece is a letter that Sinclair wrote to President Roosevelt, informing him that he was taking his socialist ideals and throwing in his lot with the California Democrats and was going to run for governor. It really is a singular moment in California history. He ran on his epic platform, End Poverty in California. And, you know, this is democratic socialism 80 years before Bernie Sanders. It was a radical revolutionary campaign, you know, inspired in part by FDR's New Deal. And of course, California tended to be a little bit more conservative at this time. And among those who opposed Sinclair vigorously were the Hollywood studio bosses. And they organized one of perhaps the first really sustained smear campaign in modern American politics against Upton Sinclair. And part of that, of course, was bankrolled by William Randolph Hearst. So this is an interesting piece that brings together a lot of not only California history, but American history.
Great, thank you. Theresa, where would you like to go for me?
I love that board game that you had about redlining. Just an amazing thing. I don't know if other people saw this, but it's actually a game by Psychology Today, and what it is it is like what life is for people, you know. So the whites get, I think, $1 million to start off, and they have a different deck of cards, and the African Americans get $10,000 to start off with, and again, a different set of cards. And I think that's it, because, you know, we talk about, you know, equaling this playing field. It's never equalized, you know. And we, you know, and I think that this game is sort of indicative of that, you know, even if, you know, we're supposedly playing on the same field in the same game, the cards that are often dealt to us, the opportunities are really they're just not the same. And this is such a powerful little piece, and the fact that you have it all intact, I think, is incredible. I don't know how you found that. You know, I was going to ask you about it.
Well, it was just something that showed up at an estate, and it's interesting because, you know, this was the Psychology Today made this as a really specific point. It was actually first published in one of the issues of the magazine, and because the message was so important, it was actually produced into this box set game. And I can tell you, we've attempted to play not this copy, but another copy, and it's impossible to win this game if you're not one of the white piece players. So it really does underscore how difficult it was for many disenfranchised people to own property. So, and
at this late in the game, I mean, the influence of what redlining did to communities, I think, is drawn. I mean, it's just made so impactful by, you know, as you play the game, it's impossible to win.
Right, exactly. Great. So Gary, was there one last item that you wanted to maybe call to?
Yeah, just real quick. Yeah. Too. I love another little Gold Rush book. I'm prejudiced about Gold Rush materials.
Okay.
It's by Jacob Eckfield and William E. Du Bois, called New Varieties of Gold and Silver Coins. And we're going to be able to bring that guy up. So anyhow, what I love about it is that it gives a good description of the coins that were being minted in California. You had all this gold, and as a consequence of that, they were trying to protect against forgery or you know, doing taking advantage of people. And so they actually printed this little pamphlet. And what is really astonishing about it is the initial paste down. As you open up the book, it actually has a nugget of gold mounted on it.
Wow.
And then you go a little further, and I've seen a number of copies where somebody's actually scratched off that little negative gold. And then you go back further too, where they actually do, and it's printed in gold, where they reproduce gold coins. And it's just almost a three-dimensional page. And they also reproduce Mormon coins, so people would understand what would be a legitimate US coin versus a Mormon coin, a Brigham Young coin. Yeah, there we go. I just love that page there. And again, these are comparing real accepted legitimate California coins and those that are issued by the Mormon Church in Great Salt Lake City. So it's an extraordinary rarity, but I just love as it so well encapsulates the mania associated with the California gold rush. And again, come to California for health, wealth, and sunshine.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that. I'm gonna turn it to just questions really quick. We don't have too many, but if there are some more, please pop those in our Q&A or in chat. But one of the questions that we did have in the questions was about going back to our very first item, the Moy Bridge or Moy Bridge. I'm not pronouncing it right.
Bridge, yes,
Yeah. So do we know, did he make the full plate panorama on the same day as the full plate version?
Well, he did the negatives on the same day, all within a space of about 3 hours. Yeah, and so it again, he had those glass negatives that he had to coat with the wet plate collodion, and then remove it and have it fixed on the spot too, because he always had, photographers back then always had to have a portable dark room with them to fix the images. So a year later, he did an even larger panorama, but this one is the first one. It's such a monumental work, and he just captures, once I probably get a lot of preservation people mad at me, but I did circle it around to show people how this was a 360-degree panorama of the city in 1877. So it just shows you the great imagination of Edward Muybridge.
Great. We have another question from Nick to Theresa. In the images from Mi Vida Loca, there was an advertisement for a dealer in zoot suits with a business location given as Oakland Caliphas. The term Caliphas, do you know anything about that?
I actually don't know. I'd have to research it a little bit. So maybe I'll research it and get back to Nick. I should find out who Nick is. He can email me and I'll follow up.
Oh, you know him. It's Nick Arataka. So.
Oh, okay. I don't know about that. Yeah. Okay.
All the way from New Haven, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd have to do some research. Do you know about that? I mean, Caliphas is just California related thing. So.
Yeah. Queen Califia, right? So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure Theresa knows about this too, but that particular piece reminded me of, there was a similar zine publication that was produced in the Mission District in the early 80s called Cholo, and it had a lot of the same sort of imagery and local advertising and other things like that. And I know you and the Bancroft have been on the vanguard of including that material in special collections, which is
right. And also our ethnic studies library on campus has also been fantastic about it. I think they have a full run of maybe the Loca.
Yeah.
Great. So we have some questions about the Blacks and Whites board game, and I'm happy to answer those. Personally, there were some questions about pricing, but it was a board game that we have, and we see it every once in a while. So I'll answer those privately. And then, so the question from Priscilla is, what are you looking forward to in 2021 in the world of California books? Anybody? Are there some books that we know that are being published? Some histories that are coming out? Anybody have any thoughts? Anybody been working on anything during the pandemic?
Well, actually, Gary has, even though it's not California related, you might want to talk about that.
Yeah, Gary, what are you working on?
I've been working on a descriptive bibliography of the Klondike and California and Alaska gold rushes. And I always like to point out to people that the guy who discovered gold up in the Klondike was from California. He's a native Californian. And the Klondike was really populated at first by Californians going north this time. So And this is going to be published by the Book Club of California, and it should be, it's at press right now and will be available in the late spring. So I have about 700 published eyewitness descriptions, yes. And it's a companion to the one that John just pulled off the shelf there. So be a little bit.
I was going to say this is never far from my desk.
It's a great book.
This is, I mean, if you'll pardon the expression, this is the gold standard. Gary's bibliography on the California Gold Rush is absolutely indispensable for anybody who, you know, obviously who deals in that sort of material, but anybody who's interested in the Gold Rush from a historical perspective, or California history in general, printing history. It's just a fantastic resource.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. But I've had the privilege of going up to the Klondike 3 times, but being born and raised.
I'm just impressed that you have not been affected like people like me by COVID fog, like fog of brain. You've been very productive during this.
I must confess, though, I've been too chicken to go up there in January, you know, when it's 40 below zero.
Right, exactly. So somebody in chat has told us, Denise has said that Caliphos is slang. So, which is, yeah, interesting. Also, we have another question in chat, which is, what was the ratio of pro-Mormon versus anti-Mormon texts in the early years of California settlement? Do we have a sense of that?
That's a good question. I'd like Theresa, I will have to, if I can get the name of the person asking that, I will do some research on it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there were, as we discussed earlier, you know, some of the Mormon colonies being developed down in Southern California. But the number of imprints are, with the California imprint, are very, very rare. So,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
at least up until the late 19th and the 20th century, of course. But during the letterpress era, those were very, very rare. So
Great.
if you find one under your bed, you've got some gold there.
Great. Well, so I think I'd ask both Gary and Theresa. Brad's already mentioned what his indispensable California kind of go-to bibliography is, but do you, besides Gary's books, do you have ones that you would recommend for people who are interested in collecting in this area?
Well, I did see a copy of like the Zamorano 80, but somebody had scooped that up already. And but Gary also did an incredible bibliography related to that for the auction of Dan Volkman's wonderful collection. So.
That was such a great privilege going to Dan's home before he again went to his reward, and to be able to go through that collection. You know, this was for Dorothy Sloan, who was the auctioneer, and she was very generous in allowing us to write as much as we wanted to. And W. Michael Mathis wrote the entries concerning pre-Gold Rush California too. So it was, I think I'm very proud of that work and how well Dorothy Sloan produced it in hardcover and it's softback too. So.
Great.
The Zamorano 80, and you know, there have been attempts, and they have been published, of updating that sort of thing. And so, you know, when you select only 80, they originally wanted to actually do 100, Zamorano 100, but they couldn't get agreement on 100 titles, so they scaled it back.
Oh, to have been around that table. Nick has chimed in here to tell us that the Slater Fruits of Mormonism is very anti-Mormon, accusing them of all kinds of exploitation and depredations against overland travelers on the way to California. So thanks for chiming in there, Nick, and giving us some more information.
I apologize for not stressing that enough.
Well, I really want to thank everybody for participating. I do have actually one more question. Theresa, can you tell us more about the Bancroft Library's California Historical Collections and Research Plans? And I need to say, many thanks, go Bibliophile Bears.
So I'm not quite sure what that question means. Can you read it again? Oh.
Yeah, tell us more about the Bancroft Library's California Historical Collections and Research Plans. I'm sure you must have a million things going on. Yeah.
I mean, that's so broad, you know. So again, the Bancroft's sort of unusual in that we actually collect from the colonial period all the way to the present. And I would say a lot of our more interesting acquisitions are recent things, you know, so we're more focused on building in the late 20th century into the 21st century, but we certainly do pick up things from you know, earlier in time if we have gaps or if there's unique things that out there that we, you know, that come on the market. But I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I think again, part of the way we're trying to build that collection is more reflective of, you know, the whole and you know, the burgeoning amount of material that documents the end of the 20th century. So.
Great, terrific. Well, I want to thank everybody again for taking part. We're getting close to the hour, and I want to invite you all to go out there, and I hope you're inspired to look at some of the items we were looking at and look for other things. You can search by keywords. There are categories such as California, and also by type like ephemera or books. Photographs that we've seen many of. So you go to abaa.org/VBF to search the fair. We also have one last program this afternoon. It's very exciting. For the last 3 years, the Northern and Southern California chapters of the ABAA have sponsored a Young Book Collectors Prize. And we're going to hear from all 3 years past winners. And their collections are so diverse and interesting, and they're so passionate about what they've collected. I hope you will all join us. That's at 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. You can find the details by clicking the program button on the website for the fair. Thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us. And thank you, Theresa, and thank you, Gary, and thank you, Brad.